Okay, Amir, let us know when we already go live, yeah? Then MC can take over. Thank you. Okay, Sharizan, over to you. We're already live on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. Once again, thank you so much. This is our second day of the consultation of the VNR report. We'd like to welcome our YBs for coming in today into our Zoom session. Good morning once again to all our distinguished guests as well, our panelists and our speakers for today and our moderators. Now, to all our friends who just joined us, we've got about 48 people today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let your friends know what is happening today. We are here with an event jointly organized by Institute Masa Depan Malaysia and the All-Party Parliamentary Group Malaysia on Sustainable Development Goals, APPGM-SDG, in partnership with the Economic Planning Unit, the Malaysian CSO-SDG Alliance, and the UN Malaysia Country Team. Well, yesterday we had an interesting session, very nice session indeed. We talked about poverty and nutrition. We also covered strengthening resiliency and transforming healthcare. And today, this morning, in just a few moments, we will be having our third session, which is inclusive economic growth, which is under the SDG 8 and 10. And this will be happening in just a few moments. But right now, I'd just like to share a couple of housekeeping rules. To all our speakers, kindly switch off your camera and also mute your mic until your session begins. To all our viewers in Zoom, if you have any questions at all, you may post them in the Q&A box that we have available for you. And to all our friends who are viewing it from Facebook Live, you can also send us your questions via the chat box available as well. And to all our moderators, you may select your questions, whereas panelists will be able to respond to the questions through the Q&A function. All right, so how's everybody feeling today? Hope all of you got your coffees ready, all dah bersiap sedia for another fantastic session. We'll be running right up till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. My name is Sharizan, your host for today. And right now we shall proceed directly into our first session for today, which will talk about inclusive economic growth. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 pandemic has had its impact on the economy, and therefore this session will review the status and be focused on addressing these concerns so as to ensure that they are in equal opportunities for all and a narrowing of equalitous outcomes as well. Now, I would like to introduce your moderator for today. He is the Board of Trustee for MASA. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Sulaiman Mahbub. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sharizan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning, our esteemed panelists and participants. Yesterday, we have a good discussion, good depth, and as to how COVID-19 has impacted poverty and healthcare. Today, we shall discuss the impact of our economy and how the lockdown has caused enormous disruptions to businesses and livelihood. And then we review the VNR 2021 report, the issues raised, and moving forward towards our recommendation. Session shall be on Chapter 4, as you know, of the VNR report, which carries the title of Inclusive Economic Growth. This covers 2 SDG goals, which are SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 10, reduced inequalities. Let me now introduce our panelists. Representing the government is Encik Azlan bin Abdul Rashid, civil servant and director of the Equity Development Division of EPU. Secondly, representing the Parliament, we have Yang Berhormat Tuan Ahmad Fahmi Fadil, MP of Lembah Pantai and member of APPGM-SDG Group. Our third panelist represents the civil society organizations, namely Mr. Kon On Sin from the Yayasan Kajian dan Pembangunan Masyarakat and OA Organics. Fourthly, we have an academician, a friend of mine, Professor Dr. Jamal Osman, Deputy Chairman of the Academy Professor Malaysia, and also a Senior Fellow of MASA. Welcome, fellow panelists. Thank you for accepting the invitation by the organizers. Okay, the format today, we shall take about the same time as we had previous sessions. Each panelist will be given about 10 minutes to share their thoughts on the VNR 2021 report. We then have a Q&A, question and answer session before wrapping up. Next time is pretty tight on us. We are given just about 55 minutes. No, an hour, 15 minutes. We seek our cooperation from all panelists to keep within the 10 minutes time frame given to you all. Let me now, I won't waste much more time. With further ado, let me invite presenting the government, Cik Azlan bin Abdul Rashid, Director of the Equity Development Division of the APU. Cik Azlan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you Yang Bahagia Tan Sri. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and very good morning to all. Distinguished moderator Yang Bahagia Tan Sri, Datuk Sri Dr. Sulaiman Mahmud, distinguished panel members, Tan Sri, Datuk Sri, Datuk, respected participants, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. First, I'd like to thank Yang Bahagia Tan Sri moderator for the kind introduction, and also I would like to commend APPPG, SDG and Institute Masa in partnership with EPU and UNCT Malaysia in governing the conversation of Malaysia's second voluntary national review VNR report 2020. This is in conjunction with the Malaysia VNR report at the high-level political forum at the United Nations, New York, which was held last week on the 15th July 2021. It is indeed a privilege for me to be one of the panel speakers today on the day 2, together with YB Tuan Ahmad Fahmi Fazil, member of APPG, and MP of the Lembah Pantai Parliamentarian, and also Mr. Kon On Sin from the civil society, and also Yang Bahagia Prof. Dr. Jamal Osman from UKM Academy, Professor Malaysia, and also the senior fellow Masa from the think tank. Ladies and gentlemen, my short presentation today will cover SDG 8, which about the decent work and economic growth, and also the SDG 10 is on the reduced inequality. SDG 8 and SDG on the decent work and the SDG 10 on the addressing equality is the main focus of the Chapter 4 of the Malaysian VNR report. And we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on the economy, and therefore this session is really, we review the status and the achievement, and we focus on addressing all these concerns, as well as to ensure that there are equal opportunities for all, and also we make sure that the equality will be achieved as targeted. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first go to the first slide. With regard to the current status and the progress of the SDG 8, which is on the decent work and economic growth. With respect to the economic, I think for the last few years, I think our economy expanded by an average of 2.8% per annum during the period of 2017-2020, and this growth has translated the GDP per capita of about 41,151 in 2020. And the growth rate of the GDP for the past 3 years per capita in 2019 is at 4% and is considerably higher compared to other major economies. And the achievement of our economy for the past few years is mostly driven by 3 key sectors: manufacturing, services, and also the agriculture. In terms of the progress of the shared prosperity, I think we have recorded an expansion of, with the expansion of our economic growth, we create job opportunities and also create a good labor market, which expanded by 3.3% between 2017-2020. And with this growth, the labor market added additional 479,000 workers in the economy. And also the wage also grew during that period, with the mean monthly wages and salary increasing from 2,879 in 2017 to 3,324 in 2019. And during this revision period, I think our minimum wage was also revised twice, from 1,000 ringgit to 1,200 ringgit during this period. And Malaysia is promoting inclusive growth through the expansion of SMEs and also through the digitalization. with respect to the SMEs, I think we all know that SMEs are the backbone of the Malaysian economy, contributing about almost 39% of the GDP in 2019 and employing about most half of the Malaysian workers, which is about 49%. And to spur the growth of the Malaysian SMEs, I think the Malaysian government has allocated a lot of money, at least 2.9 billion, to empower SME via training, by providing grants, soft loan, and also in some sentences we provide tax exemption and rebates. And in terms of progress of Malaysia digital platform, I think we all know that last February, the government has launched the Malaysia Digital Economy Blueprint, or My Digital, with a vision to be a regional leader in the digital economy and also to achieve inclusive and sustainable development. And also the government also committed to invest about 4.6 billion in terms of digital network or Jendela through PPP. And this investment will provide better digital infrastructure and also improve connectivity, especially in the rural area, as well as to spur growth for the future. Moving to the next slide. Even though we have made some progress in terms of the decent work and economic growth, there are still several challenges that may impede the progress in achieving the SDG 8 goals. First, one of the challenges that we are facing is that currently the economy is not expected to grow as robust as before or before the pre-COVID period. Our real GDP per capita grew at a much slower pace between 2017 and 2019 at about 5% per annum compared to the previous 5 years before, which grew about 5.1% per annum. And second, growth must be inclusive to make sure that everybody is benefited from our economic development, and not only concentrated in major cities such as Selangor, Kuala Lumpur, Pulau Pinang, and these three states stood more than 47% to our GDP. And also the gap between richer and poor states also continues to widen. And the third challenge that is about that there is problem with our labor market, I would say. Currently, they still rely on low-cost foreign laborers, and we need to increase our productivity, provide better job opportunities, and creation of high-skilled jobs. And in addition, I think the greater participation, especially female labor force, has to be improved also. And the other challenges, regard to the decent work is about the lagging human development. I would say, based on the World Bank studies, Human Capital Index, I think Malaysia ranked 55 out of 157 countries and score about 0.2%. I think there are a lot of room to improve our human capital development. Okay, for moving to the next slide. So the way forward to improve our decent work or SDG 8, I think there are few opportunities for us to work on. First, we have to make sure that the better livelihood, which can be done through improved basic health and nutrition. We can also strengthening our learning outcome and focus more on science and technology aspect. Also, we have to invest more in human capital, including emphasis on creating high quality and high paying job to make sure that everybody is benefited from our economic development. Second, how to move forward, we have to make sure that we need to enhance life cycle approach by addressing the persistent child nutrition gap. Second, we need to improve the provision of child and elderly care. And also we have to make sure that greater economic and societal support for the elderly and for our parents. And third, the way forward is we need to increase female labor force participation in our labor market. And in this case, we need to reduce barrier to make sure that women could re-enter the labor market, for example, by providing flexible working arrangement to encourage them to re-enter the labor market. And also we need to improve by promoting equitable compensation for employees we need to increase the compensation of employees to GDP, which is currently quite low compared to our regions. Okay, moving to the next slide, with respect to the progress and current status of the SDG 8, which on the reduced inequality. I think during the 11 Malaysia Plan, we targeted that median income of the B40 household to increase from 2,600 to 29 in 2014 to 3,166 in 2019. And during the 11th Malaysia Plan also, we also introduced MPI, or multi-dimensional poverty index, to measure poverty beyond income dimension. MPI poverty measures 4 dimensions, namely income, education, health, and also the standard of living. And also our target during the 11th plan is to reduce Gini coefficient from to reduce Gini coefficient to 0.4% into 2019. However, there are some challenges in our progress. For example, in 2019, our B40 income share decreased to 16% in 2019 from 16.4% in 2016. And also B40 median income also grew marginally, only by 1.8% from 2016 to 2019. And our Gini coefficient also increased 0.08% index point from 0.399 in 2016 to 0.4.7 in 2019, which indicate that our inequality slightly increased. So in terms of the initiative to reduce income gap, the government has spent a lot of money, about 72.2 billion between 4 years, between 2016 2019, to improve the well-being of the Rakyat and also to close the income gap. This includes the cash assistance to the poor people, B40, allocate scholarship to the students, and also we provide educational assistance to the B40 groups and families. And also for M40, government also provided cash assistance and also wage subsidy program during the COVID-19 period. In terms of inclusive growth, I think the government has committed to make sure that growth is inclusive and development is benefited for all, and make sure that no one is left behind. And also the government provided specific allocation for the minority group, for the vulnerable group, such as for orang asli and also the disabled communities. And also a lot of allocation was given on education, health, and housing in terms of to make sure that our socio-economic development is progressing well. Okay, moving to the next slide. Of course, there are some issues and challenges remains with respect to the SDG 10. First is our income class gap is widened, and there is disparity between income group. And also gap between states, between ethnicity, as well as the different income classes. And we see that the trend have widened over the past few years. For example, the absolute gap between the top 20 and B40 medium income has widened from 10,148 in 2016 to 11,869 in 2019. And also the growth rate of the B40 medium income is also the lowest compared to the other income classes. Between 2016 and 2019, B40 medium income grew only 1.8% compared to the growth in income of M40 group, which grew about 4.1%, and the top 20 group, which grew about 4.6%. And the second issue we are facing right now is high wealth inequality. I think just to quote example, I think for the depositor of the ASB, it was reported that almost 9% of the depositors of ASB own about almost 48% of the total saving. And also it was reported that the saving of the EPF, only about 25% of its members own almost 75% of the total saving of the EPF. So this indicates that the issue of inequality wealth inequality still persists. And also the other issue is about the basic amenity gaps. We all know that some states, some rural area in the remote area, they are still facing the issue about the basic amenities such as water, clean water, electricity, and the connectivity of internet. I think these are the main challenges that we have to tackle in order to make sure that everybody is on the right with our economic development, to make sure that the equality. And the other issue is about the gender equality. And we know that the evidence suggests that the equality between women and men in a household is a strong contributing factor to overall income inequality to society. So these are four main challenges that we are facing right now that we need to address in order to make sure that we are achieving the goal of the SDG 10. Okay, moving to the next slide. I think there are few opportunities and way forward to make sure that everybody is benefited from the growth. We have to make sure that growth is inclusive to ensure that everybody is benefited from our economic development. And by way of, first, by addressing the rising cost of living, we need also to increase the purchasing power of the people. And of course, we need to strengthen our social protection. And the second, we need to make sure that we need to enhance our shared prosperity by expanding educational access to all the rakyat, and also we make sure that everybody can access to the digitalization to make sure that everybody is benefited from the current trend. We need to promote job opportunities for all, and we need to encourage private and also domestic investment to make sure that they come to our country and create high value job for our people. And lastly, we need to make sure that we need to safeguard our resiliency of our livelihood. We need to invest in a greener and more inclusive development. And we need to do something with our fiscal policy. We need to reform our labor. We need to strengthen our social safety net and to make sure that everybody is no one left behind. And also we have to leverage on the digital technology to make sure that everybody is capable to do businesses online, especially during for the B40 group, to make sure that everybody can benefit for the current trend. Just to conclude that the moving forward government is committed to reduce inequality through income improvement and social assistance for the all vulnerable people, vulnerable group, and also B40 also. With that, Tan Sri, I end my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Terima kasih, Cik Azlan, for your good comprehensive update on the development of the country, covering growth and distribution. Let me now invite Yang Berhormat Tuan Ahmad Fahmi Fadil, MP for Lembah Pantai, to make his presentation. Yang Berhormat, the floor is yours.
Terima kasih, Tan Sri. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Good morning. Wama Pengirutan Syahau, saudara-saudari Ilai Vanakam. Nama berita Kopi Vosian. Thank you for having me as part of this session. As a Member of Parliament, of course, I look forward to Parliament resuming beginning next week, inshallah. And there's an opportunity for us to address issues around the question of sustainability and also sustainable development goals. Although in this current climate that we are in, and at least anecdotally, seeing what I have seen on the ground, the term SDG, the S in SDG right now for a lot of people is not sustainable, it's just survivable, how to survive. And I think there are just a couple of points that I like to kind of highlight based on the SDGs 8 and 10. When we're talking about employment and particularly decent work, the current statistic provided by Department of Statistics states that in May of 2021, the unemployment rate is at about 4.5%. Of course, this is a lagging indicator. And if we are to look at where we are today, and as you know, the uncertainties around sectors, economic sectors opening or remaining shut, the impact of workplace clusters and factory clusters on different businesses, as well as the overall economic environment. I don't know whether in the next couple of months, we will be seeing a much higher proportion of people unemployed. And so this becomes a very urgent question, which has to be addressed not only immediately, but also sustainably. I think at the heart of it, the policy proposals by the government has to be not only immediately applicable and efficacious for people whose livelihoods have been affected. And we can see that as the Malaysian DG of Health has highlighted in the first 3 months of this year, has seen almost an equivalent number of people who have committed suicide as I believe it was half of last year. And this is exceptionally worrying because this effect on mental health is something which obviously employment and employability is a factor. In fact, as a member of parliament, I have been getting a lot of requests, people who have been asking for work, people who are asking me to take them on in my office, for example. Of course, all of this is anecdotal. It's just based on my experience as a member of parliament, but I'm on the ground almost every day. In fact, after this, I'll be going to my office so I can speak with a little bit of authority on what is actually happening on the ground. And actually, the other thing of concern when we talk about reducing inequality, I take note of what Cik Azlan had raised earlier. I think it's exceptionally worrying when we're reminded that in terms of EPF savings, 25% hold 75% of total savings in the EPF, and there is also some discussion right now with regards to gig workers. A lot of people look to the gig economy as food deliverers, and not so much in terms of public transport, but perhaps for logistics, as a filling in the gap for the time being. And we also see that a lot of workers may not necessarily get the kind of social protection that should be rightfully eligible for them. There has been a lot of questions raised by members of parliament about those who are employed in the gig economy, particularly food delivery applications, where there's questions about whether riders have access to the kind of social protection, whether it's SOCSO, whether it's EPF. EPF, yes, SOCSO, less so. And we've also discovered, I've personally discovered that there are these cracks that a number of people fall into. A lot of people, particularly in urban areas and suburban areas where there's a high proportion of participation in the gig economy, especially among youth, what happens is that sometimes people share their gig accounts. So they could be riding their own motorbike, but in the system, they appear as their brother or their friend. Yeah, so they're not appearing as themselves. And when they meet with an accident, they are not covered. Yeah, even though while they are delivering, they are still providing money and revenue or income to the company. I've raised this with a few companies, but it's important when we talk about sustainability and in terms of SDGs, when it comes to employment, that these gaps have a lot more of our attention now. And I think another point which also is extremely worrying is we have heard about not only many SMEs that have been suffering or have chosen to close down their businesses. A lot of people who've been employed previously, they may have been earning, several thousand ringgit. Some of them have told me, the cutback has been so severe that they're only earning barely 10% of what they used to earn. But they're still employed by the companies. As a member of parliament, of course, I don't have access to all the data, and I think the Labour Department actually plays an extremely important role in trying to assess the situation on the ground. And this leads me to the most important point actually for me, which is data. While we talk about SDGs, the veracity and also how up-to-date the data is, I think is critical, not only to make sure that people protection for workers and to reduce income inequality, these targets are met and changes can be made, but specifically in the here, in the now, right here, right now, these families are trying to survive day to day, month by month, and data, exact data, which can easily be collected by different agencies, should also be shared with members of parliament, because we're the ones who are most on the ground, right now. And this leads me to another critical point, which is there still is resistance to interministerial and interagency cooperation in order to achieve various goals, including SDGs. And this is lamentable, this is avoidable, but it persists. A lot of it has to do with data. And this is quite a quandary. This is quite something which is baffling. The assumption oftentimes is that, this data, I'm the one who took the trouble, my team is the one, my anak buah, my team, they went down to the ground to knock on doors to get the data. Why should I share with any other agency or ministry? I once called a town hall with various, actually, it was with APBG on SDGs. We had a town hall session, and you can see that between agencies, there's very little conversation, and there seems to be a lot of replication, and I think it's extremely worrying that in this day and age, particularly when we're confronted with a pandemic and multiple crises, that there's not enough conversation taking place between agencies. And perhaps my last point before I yield has to do with perhaps, when we're talking about whether it's a more macro approach to planning, particularly in terms of reducing inequality. Right now, actually in March of this year, Parliament was supposed to have discussed, debated and passed the 12th Malaysia Plan, but that has been delayed until September at least. And also there has been calls by economists to review the Shared Prosperity Vision 2030, whether a lot of the targets, a lot of the aims are still relevant, given that it was first raised in 2019, in October of 2019. And I think there needs to be a review, both for the 12th Malaysia Plan, as well as the Shared Prosperity Vision 2030, in order for us to really look at policy prescriptions that are more in line with post-COVID or post-pandemic era, whenever that may come. So thank you very much. These are some of my points. Ultimately, as a parliamentarian, I'd like to see Parliament reconvene and more consistently discuss these issues. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Thank you, Yang Berhormat Encik Ahmad Fahmi Fadil, MP for Lembah Pantai. Very interesting. You raised a lot of good points, especially about the four line of society. For example, question of sustainability becoming survival now. And but me as a technocrat, I'm very interested in your idea of sharing of data. It's particularly important. The more data we have, the better we understand the problem. So I think we take note of this. That in order to enhance the achievement of our SDG, we must have a lot of data to be shared by us. Let me now invite to our third speaker, Mr. Kon on scene from Yayasan Kajian and Pembangunan Masyarakat and OA. Mr. Kon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Pleasure to and a privilege to share with you all and some of my ideas. I'm sorry, having some bit of a technical problem because I just changed my MacBook and tried to put the slides and do it a more clever way, but I think I'm having some issues here. But anyway, how is this coming up? Is the screen appearing?
Yeah, screen is appearing on send, but it is not on, it's like a small screen. You can enlarge it. If not, your points are visible and clear.
Okay, let me try and enlarge it. How do I enlarge this? Okay, I'm getting my daughter to help me enlarge this.
I think just need slideshow, the slideshow tab, and then at the top.
Yes.
Slideshow next to animation.
I see it.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, no, slideshow at the top.
Slideshow.
At the top. At the top. You insert the tab.
Oh, insert tab. All right.
No. Move along to slideshow. Slide.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then play from start. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, it's come out.
Yeah. Good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. Okay, let me I just want to highlight some of the things that were put in the VNR report. The 6 things I wanted to quickly go through today, that there's a clear interconnectedness between people, economy, environment, and climate change. Secondly, we'll show that the Orang Asli are important towards sustainable environment and climate change. Thirdly, how one way forward is to develop a green economy with the indigenous peoples or Orang Asli, and we'll look at a model. Fourth, some of the good policy recommendations that we can leverage on. Gaps, and finally, how do we tweak it to make it get there? Good policy recommendations that we can leverage. The 2020 we had the Amazon fires, and the science is clear. Reckless land use is driving the Amazon forest to the brink of economic collapse. That's according to the Amazon Watch. And the link, nature's role in macroeconomy. In 2005, the World Bank proposed wealth as a complementary indicator to gross domestic product for sustainable development. And development is about managing a broad portfolio of assets, produced, human, financial, but also natural capital. So that was introduced by World Bank in 2005. And then the country's economic development is strongly related to its national wealth. And in poorer countries, it contributes 47%, according to this World Bank report. Again, we have, here we go. These global studies have also shown that they've put an economic value to nature by the OECD. But according to the Swiss Re Institute, overall, 55% of global GDP may depend on nature. And so SDG has captured that now in climate change and SDG 13 and 15. Now, what is the relevance of this to the indigenous people and Orang Asli? Well, indigenous people make up 6% of the global population, and they manage 25% of the planet's surface area, but they care for 80% of Earth's diversity. And so the indigenous people are actually the best partners in sustaining biodiversity and our planet. 2 more studies I'd like to highlight here. Deforestation has found to be 5 times higher out of indigenous territories. That means where there are Orang Asli or indigenous people living, the deforestation is 5 times slower in these places. And there's another international longitudinal study done in Nepal. It also showed that there was a 37% relative reduction in deforestation and a 4.3% relative reduction in poverty. So this is the unique position that the Orang Asli play in slowing down climate change and in conserving our environment for the good of all. Now, thirdly, we're coming to a point of the way forward. How do you develop a green economy? Under the YKPM or OA Organics, we've developed a model of trying to develop this pilot of a green economy. The components are, we've started with natural farming and to increase their incomes to 2,000 to 4,000. That's the target. From there, they can afford quality housing, food, clothes, and education. And third component is that it will then equip them to sustain the environment through a agroforestry approach. And finally, strengthening the culture and community cohesion. So that's what a green economy we're trying to develop. Here it is. We provided, we brought some training the Orang Aslis how to do organic and natural farming. And then we got some seed capital to help them with pumps and irrigation. And part of it was sponsored by the Orang Asli micro grant facility under the Ministry of Finance. Then we connected them to fair markets. We have taught them how to do packing, processing, and then finally get to higher value. So what has happened since 2016 to the last 5 years, the farms have grown from 14 to 60 farmers. Earnings, about 10% of them are earning between 1,500 to 2,400, 20% between 800 to 1,200, 70% are on the lower for different reasons, their health, age, and their other priorities, or they are multitasking with different economic activities. Impact-wise, we've seen them be, as a result of this intervention, they've been able to buy washing machines, extend their houses, scaling up their farms, greater social cohesion, and they're now in the process of building the capacity to reforest their lands. Here are some of the photos of the money, how they use their money. Okay, number 4. We actually have some very good policy recommendations, and some of them are job creation, creating innovation, market access, rural and regions with balanced development, in particular food production for the rural sector, and that will help us achieve the SDG 1, 8, and 10. So 2 other things that were mentioned in the VNR report as well, in box page 55 of box article 5, was that of community forests that was introduced in the 11th plan, and the enterprise. So these 2 things are actually very, very powerful to make Malaysia as a world leader in climate action and zero poverty. But let me try and explain to you. Unfortunately, I didn't have my modified slides, but let me try and explain this complex issue. Where are the gaps before we can get that? I think there may be a lack of integration and coordination and streamline this whole process in one direction. You see, the problem is the state cannot gazette the forest as an Orang Asli reserve, or because it needs its revenue for logging concessions. And so in 2019, the MOF created an EFT, or Economic Fiscal Transfer Fund, of 60 million set aside for the state to protect the forest. But the gap is here. The economic fiscal transfer doesn't oblige the state to engage the Orang Asli as partners in sustaining the forest. So whatever good intentions will be limited. And the economic fiscal transfer doesn't go far enough to develop a green economy and a more sustainable economy. Here are some of the figures that I've captured from the GDP. Logging royalty is actually 1.2 million in 2019. And the green economy will far exceed that in many, many ways. And remember that nature itself contributes 55% to its GDP. So how do we get this? To incentivize the state and finances the state to protect the forest, it has created this economic fiscal transfer, which is a very good thing and which we need to leverage on. But it needs to go a bit further. It needs to partner with the Orang Asli to manage and sustain the forest, and start up not just a protected forest, but a community-based managed forestry as part of the EFT. Secondly, to invest to build green economies by providing roads, green energy, and digital access. And with that, there will be emerging economic activities that will contribute further and strengthen GDP and taxes to the federal government, which it can then feed back to the state in its EFT to protect more forest. So in closing, not only is it the right thing to do in compensating the Orang Asli for the many years of free services that they have provided in sustaining the forest and climate change. But it's also a good thing because it begins to benefit everyone, local communities in providing clean air, clean water, microclimates for better local agriculture, sustaining of land that's degraded, and in essential irrigation, and contribute towards this nature's capital of 55% of GDP. Deforestation is slower, it provides, sustains public goods, saves in risk management, reduces expenditure in handouts and social welfare, and finally, it sustains a more robust economy and creating revenue for everyone. So some of the pictures, and here we are. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Korn. Very interesting. You have touched a very important area, namely rural environment. Also, in that perspective, the importance of orang asli in GDP. And it's good to know that nature, can also contribute about 55% of GDP. That brings us to the fourth. Thank you again, Mr. Korn. And that brings the fourth speaker, Professor Dr. Jamal Osman, Deputy Chairman of Academy Professor Malaysia. He's an economist by training, good friend of mine. Dr. Jamal, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Tan Sri, esteemed speakers and participants. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi and salam sejahtera. I don't have a ready presentation slides for you, but definitely we'll have a couple of points to be shared here. It's mainly about data and measurement. I think it's important that we have the right data, we have the right measures, so that we will do the right thing. So the first thing here is the importance of data collection that will enable us to to have a good measure of income and wealth disparity. For income disparity, I think this is well being measured over the past years, and we have seen our Gini coefficient, for example, that reflects income distribution or income inequality. But on wealth disparity, I think we need to develop that measure, not only to reflect the national statistic, but also to reflect the income disparity, or wealth disparity across the various ethnic groups as well as intra-ethnic groups. And so that with this measure, with this data, more targeted measures can be think of. And number two is about the number of absolute poor, the number of, the rate of poverty incident made by the new PLI, which is about 6% right now. We used to have like 0.5%. I think 6% is very significant. And we need to highlight this statistic, not just the relative poverty statistic, but this absolute poverty statistic, which is, I think, is of great concern. 6% is quite huge, and this should be highlighted and be monitored closely, so that various assistance, like for example under the COVID-19 pandemic, various assistance are being dispersed to the various targeted groups. With this kind of measure, particularly on the absolute poor, then we will have a measure which is going to be well targeted, not sweeping, which cuts across the major income groups like B40. I think that's quite general, quite sweeping. We need to really target on those made worse off in absolute terms, and that can only be measured or reflected by the use of the PLI statistic. And for that matter, I think it's important that our country, Malaysia, develop a mechanism to identify target groups, especially those who are made worse off in absolute terms. And right now we are seeing various measures meant to help our people, but that's quite sweeping, quite a blanket approach, and such such specific measure that would identify the target groups, the more important or the priority target groups will be needed. I think this is quite similar to the case of the 97-98 crisis that we faced decades ago, where we need to develop a mechanism to identify those targeted groups which were made worse off in absolute terms, not in relative terms. My fourth point is about the importance to develop a beyond GDP indicator. We know that the GDP is well designed to reflect economic size or the value of marketed goods and services produced by our economy, but there is not really an indicator. It's not a good indicator, or it was never meant to measure genuine progress or well-being. And therefore, I think Malaysia is now it's timely that we look into this. There are many beyond GDP indicators which would not only reflect or capture the economic dimension, but it also captures social sustainability as well as the ecological sustainability. And I think we are now really need that. It's high time that Malaysia look into this. We have been talking about this for so many years already, but I'm yet to see such a kind of beyond GDP measure being adopted or implemented so that it can be used along with our conventional GDP measure. For example, I noted that the median income for B40 group particularly is not growing well, not as much as that of GDP growth. This shows that in terms of equity, our B40 has become worse off. And for example, if we adopt a kind of beyond GDP measure like GPI, Genuine Progress Indicator, that would show that our B40 group in terms of monetary value of their welfare will go down substantially in comparison to, say, the top 20 or the top 10 income groups. But so far, we don't have that kind of measure to reflect how equity has gone down for the various income classes, and the GDP cannot be used to reflect that. And for that matter, beyond GDP indicator, particularly the so-called Genuine Progress Indicator, will be very useful in order to reflect the three dimensions: economy, social, and ecology in one unified measure. And interestingly, it is in monetary metrics. It is in monetary basis, just like the GDP, so that we can actually estimate the genuine progress per capita basis. And point number 5 is I would consider this equality, whether it is income inequality or wealth inequality, is one of the most important indicators of SDG. And I think it's important that we relook the kind of taxation regime. For example, GST, or you may call it value-added tax, and this is one approach that would help actually to help in terms of wealth inequality. But of course, it must be accompanied by a progressive taxation regime, not just GST or VAT. And also, we need to consider other taxation like capital gains tax as well as inheritance tax. And these measures through reforms in our taxation regime will actually help the income inequality and in the end, wealth inequality better. Point number 6 is the importance of community-based approaches. This is a kind of decentralized approaches in terms of empowering the economy of the community. One particular instrument is the Wakaf instrument. This has been talked, in many discourses. The Wakaf has been much debated, much talked about. But I'm yet to see, important developments such as national statistics on the kind of Wakaf assets that we have, and how these Wakaf assets can be turned into into more tangible outcomes in terms of economic empowerment. And for example, we know that we have billions of ringgit of work of assets, but so far the public is yet to see which particular asset is actually a work of asset. So I think we need to have innovative approaches. For example, the need for work of assets to be shown to the public, for example, via the use of logos that show that, wow, this particular building or property is actually work of, and that means it's owned by the community at large, not by any particular government agency. And through that way, I think the public, the community will be, made more compelled to contribute further to work of. And number 7 is the importance of data on income flows, and this is normally expressed via social accounting metric. But as I say it, we are not being quite punctual in producing this social accounting metric. I like to see, for example, SAM being updated like twice in every 5 years, meaning that we may follow, the frequency of our household income survey. So far, I think the latest SAM is, I think 5 years ago. And I think that's very much way below par, even compared to Indonesia, where they produce like, once in every 2 or 3 years. Number 8, the importance of data on underemployment. Underemployment here, I mean, is not just in terms of work hours, but also in terms of qualification, whether or not those workers are actually working based on their qualification. Like for degree holders, should be working on jobs, which is quite equivalent to the requirement of a degree kind of training, not jobs normally done by school levels. So I think it's important for this kind of statistics so that more targeted approaches can be developed. And my last point will be, I think this is just been mentioned by our earlier speaker, the importance of protection and security for our gig economy workers. Yeah, we are encouraging the gig economy, but we need also to provide or to develop measures, particularly with respect to workers' protection and security. I think that's my sharing here, Tan Sri.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal. You raised several very important points. We started by talking about the importance of good data, and I share with you, and this was a point raised by Yang Muhammad Ahmad just now, member from MP from Pantai, and also you also talked about the rise in poverty from very low percentage to about 6%, and what are looking to that. Then also you look at question of distribution, for example, suggesting have a look at equality. Look at equality, another perspective. And then you also mentioned about the measuring whether GDP is a good measurement in the first place. That's something we talked about that even in the 70s when I was in EPU. We're still talking about it now, Prof. Jamal. And then something that we got to look forward, that our SDG don't just look at the GDP, but also other measurements that will support areas that concerns with overall development. You touch a bit on the role of taxation system, fiscal system. Yes, Malaysia should be doing a lot of reform in the fiscal area. That's another area. And to look at how to raise revenue from other sources of assets, not just income. For example, from your property, that sort of thing. These are, and also how to mobilize some Islamic instrument like Wakaf. That's an interesting point. We got to look into this. And also you mentioned about SAM, or social accounting metrics. Yes, this is a complement to the suggestion of GDP, but SM is an important measure the distributive aspect of our national account. That's something. Okay. Thank you very much, all the speakers. Let me now. We are now in the area of question and answer session, and I have several questions here. First one is a question about our gender inequality. Several of our participants have raised this point. So EPU, what indicators we have, for example, by question by Mary, Shanti, Darren, what measures do you have with respect to the gender inequality? How do you measure it, and then how you what do you call as judge the progress, whether it has been reduced or not? There's something that EPU people want to look at it. And then there is this question, long target, that's talking about opportunity and our long-term target, but what has been hindering the implementation of these measures so that we can achieve a long-term target of the country, for example, eradication of poverty, employment, structuring, that sort of thing. What can we do, that sort of thing. So these are some questions to the EPU. And then there's a suggestion here that we should look at the area of question by Omna Shri Ong, talking about importance to look at it from the level of governance. This is something that we got to look how much importance we give to governance. So can get EPU to comment on this question, or even the speakers may want to question it, about importance of good economic governance to facilitate our achievement long-term target, for example. Okay, anybody want to take up from our speakers? Gender inequality.
Okay, bagi atas Azlan from EPU, let me touch on the gender equality and the target which was raised by a participant. I think I would like to touch on the female labor force participation. Currently, our female labor force participation is about 55–56%. And in our 12th plan, we target the labor force participation to increase from 55 to 59% within next 4 or 5 years. So what are the initiatives we are planning to do? We are planning to provide flexible working arrangements to the women to re-enter the labor market. And also we encourage the employer to provide childcare facility at their workplace. And also we encourage home-based economic activities for women to do businesses or to do related work at their home. And in terms of how to achieve gender equality, I think currently the government is reviewing related law to ensure that women are better off and better protected, both in terms of civil law and also the Sharia law. And also in the government, I think, as Tan Sri aware, that we try to increase at least 20% of the high-level participation of women in the high-level policy making. I think currently within the government, I think the rate is quite encouraging. I think even though it's not achieved 20% yet, but I think the level is keep increasing. I think I would stop there first.
Yeah, thank you. This is a question with respect to the position of migrant workers. They seem to be left behind. I know that we have a lot of even undocumented, unregistered foreign workers in the country. How do you acknowledge their role, and how do you take care that they are well treated by our companies and our economic system as a whole?
Okay, related to the foreign workers and the welfare, also the security, I think currently the government is trying to enforce the Acta 466 to make sure that employee at least to provide minimum standard of living, minimum standard of housing, accommodation, and also amenities, and also encourage the employer to provide good living standard condition to all the foreign employers, including the foreign workers. I think we also want to protect the welfare of the foreign workers under the Employment Act, and also we make sure that the country or the companies comply with the international standard, and make sure that there are stricter enforcement to make sure that everybody, including the foreign workers, are protected on the well-being and also the welfare of the workers. I think that's about it.
Thank you, Azlan. So far, the questions I have here are largely related to these two topics. I'd like to welcome other comments from the other speakers on these issues, like, for example, we're talking about gender inequality, we're talking about foreign workers, and also talk whether, what are the problems related in our country planning so that many of the long-term targets have not been achieved? That question is a bit broad, but I'd like to welcome Mr. Kon, Jamal, Dr. Jamal, and also our Wakil Rakyat. Broad question, there are many long-term targets are not achieved yet. What are the problems in the country? If, maybe YB want to take the question? YB Ahmad, Dr. Jamal?
I can try.
Please.
Well, if we look back at our planning the kind of priorities over the years since our first RM, Rancangan Malaysia, we noted that the very basic criterion to reflect progress is the material aspect of our economy as reflected by GDP. Well, I'm not saying that GDP is something that we should should really substitute with something else. No, I'm not saying that. GDP will remain. GDP will be the mainstay in terms of measuring the size of the economy. But certainly with that kind of drive, if we want to really measure to what extent our GDP has grown, then we were also seeing the types of processes that we undertook in order to obtain the kind of GDP growth rate. And those processes may not be actually sustainable. For example, reliance on FDIs, some extent of FDIs, I think is I think is sensible, but to rely on FDIs to fuel our growth, I think it's going to create a long run kind of distortion. It cannot be sustained. And also to rely on foreign workers. We have seen that since independence. Our economy is fueled by external factors, not just FDI, but also the use of cheap workers from abroad, foreign workers, and we cannot sustain. So I think it's high time that we relook at what we wanted. What we wanted, for our people. Do we want to grow GDP or do we want to grow welfare, well-being, kesejahteraan? If we wanted to grow welfare, then we need to have the right measure to reflect welfare. If you don't measure the right thing, how are you going to have the right processes in order to achieve that right thing? So when we talk about well-being, when we talk about welfare, it doesn't mean that we are putting aside the importance of GDP, no. But GDP, while need to grow, it shall not grow as high as what we wanted, like in the decades of the 90s. Yes, it shall grow, but not to that high.
Thank you,
it shall grow with the right processes. So the first and foremost is to review what we wanted to achieve. And beyond GDP indicator should be able to capture that.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal. We invite the special session at Masa, how to measure development. Time is very jealous of us. I'd like to give you all another round, 1 minute each. Let me start with Mr. Kon.
Thank you, Dan. I'll just quickly intervene on your last question. I think that is a fantastic question. Unfortunately, my experience has largely been in the Orang Asli context, but I think one of the big issues is coordination and integration. I mean, we got great policies, but many of these are acting in silo to one another. And so I think now is right, there needs to be an alignment or streamlining of all the policies and the objectives and working together and this deep coordination. So for example, with the Orang Asli, I think we got great policies here to move the nation forward, to address climate change and uplift the Orang Aslis out of poverty and increase food production for the whole country. So for example, the EFT, the Economic Fiscal Transfer, I believe is under KETSA, if I'm not mistaken. But KETSA has very little influence on the state because the state ultimately has jurisdiction to gazette the land as a forest reserve and to engage the Orang Asli. So if KETSA has very little leverage on the state governments to do that. And the problem is, even if they give these incentives for the state to gazette, to compensate for the loss of logging concessions, it is not able to bring in and engage the orang asli as partners to develop a green economy. And so you have another department called JAQUA, who's meant to do that. But JAQUA itself is understaffed, under-resourced. It doesn't have the capacity to build the orang asli capabilities to develop a green economy. And that in turn relies on the big infrastructure of roads, digital connectivity. So unless all these different agencies and state players, stakeholders, come in and play their role together and is coordinated, our wonderful policies actually don't get to achieve its long-term goals as intended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kon. I share the enthusiasm of trying to assist the orang asli, because I think they have been left out for quite some time. But among us, among speakers, we have Cik Azlan. Cik Azlan, please take note of all these things. It's not easy to present APU. I was from APU once, you know.
I agree. Yeah, we're good in planning, but I think we need cooperation from everybody. We cannot, the government alone cannot tackle all the problem. I think we need to do bottom-up approach. We need the support from other parties, from the private sector, from the CSO, and we also need to do more engagement in order to get the feedback what are happening on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you, Cik Azlan. I think YB is not in. Let me now just wrap up. I think our speakers have been really performed very well in terms of articulating the concern of chapter 4. Mr. Kon honestly talked about the very important topic of environment, the green economy, and how we bring in the orang asli into the mainstream economic development. I share his zeal. I know, and of course, as an economist, I agree with Dr. Jamal. But this talk about having other measures of GDP, wealth, prosperity, it's very important. Especially now we're talking about shared prosperity, vision, SPV. We got to articulate these concerned measures so that we don't just look into production. But there are other dimensions that has been. And YB has talked about some concern as a politician. He was talking about, for example, the importance of data, for example, importance of getting the right measures to measure the development in the country. The data is very important to all of us. It's very, and so the point was again emphasized by Professor Jamal. And also EPU, I think in the context of the 12 plan, has got to present its report to articulate, to incorporate some of this concern. But unfortunately, because of the COVID, the 12 plan has been deferred. I mean, we heard most probably next 1 or 2 months or so will be stable in the parliament. But the occurrence of COVID has definitely impacted our progress thus far, and has deferred a lot of discussion in this area from the political forum of the country. With that, I thank you very much, the participants, Dr. Jamal, Mr. Kon, Azlan, and also YB from Lembah Pantai. Thank you very much. I pass the floor to Sharizan. Thank you, Sharizan.
Thank you very much, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Sulaiman Mahbub. Thank you so much for moderating the session. Great insights, definitely. We've learned much. We've understood it a little bit better as well. And thank you all for your questions and answers. Unfortunately, we were not able to answer most of them, but we will attend to it, especially by day's end. We'll get a committee as well to provide the answers to each and every one of your questions as well. So again, do keep the questions coming in. We'd like to thank you for your participation as well. We've got 91 people in our room today. Thank you so much. Again, if you have any questions in our next session, which will be on sustainability and climate change, do send us your questions in the Q&A box as well. We do apologize. Time is of the essence, especially very tight. Time is quite selfish these days. So we'll try our best to accommodate everyone's request as well. And thank you for those who are viewing it on FB Live as well. Do send your questions into the chat box. And in just a few moments, at about 10:20, we shall have another session. So it's just to give you a short breather, to relax your mind, to recharge it as well before our next session, which will be sustainability and climate change. This is in the SDG 12 and 13. Now, what has Malaysia achieved and what are the gaps and what way forward? Now, this session discusses Malaysia's commitments to sustainability and climate change, the progress and challenges of SDG 12 and SDG 13, This discussion considers Malaysia's commitment to sustainability and climate action for further action to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Now, this topic is analyzed in Chapter 5 of the VNR report. Now, this will be happening exactly at 10:20. So do take a short breather right now. We shall see you back here at 10:20 to start off our session 4 or our second session for this morning. We'll see you all in just a few moments.